evening. I'm Athens Abell, and tonight I'm on watch here in beautiful downtown Ceres. Well, almost downtown. Broadcasting live on Channel 15 from Merced to Sacramento, from Livermore to Sonora, and of course streaming live over the internet at kbsv.org. If you're unfamiliar with how to find us, if you just put that into the search box, kbsv.org, it will take you to the home page, and you can click in the upper left-hand corner that says Watch Now. If you have a Mac, you may need a special program, but if you have a PC, it streams live just as easy as pie. Tonight we have a special guest, Reed Smith, who is with us for the entire hour this evening to talk to us about water, Defend Rural America, red-legged frogs, and many other things concerning the Central Valley and our possible water here. If you have been outside, you can tell that it's extremely hot, and I'm a little windblown tonight and parched. So I'd like to know if we're going to have water this summer for slip and slides and drinking. Good evening.
Good evening, Athens. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you so much for coming in this evening. You have a long list of to-do things to get to tonight, and I can hardly wait to hear about that red-legged frog. So what is going on? You said tonight's going to be a connect the dots, so I'll just sit back and you take that magic marker and connect the dots for us.
We can do that. Well, actually, we'll start with MID and the water deal. We fought for 19 months to stop the water sale to San Francisco, and I don't think we've accomplished anything. It's still moving forward.
Why is that? I thought the water sale was dead.
Well, I sat and watched the Water Advisory Committee, actually digressing back maybe about, actually it was April 23rd, Mr. Mortensen, who's running for the MID board, came in and announced that the purpose of conserving water was so that they could monetize it and sell it to San Francisco. And then he drops this bomb into the room that, oh, by the way, we can only sell it to San Francisco because they currently have a first right of refusal.
I thought that was within the new contract, not currently.
Well, you know, it's amazing. That was voted upon in 1996 by 3 of the existing board directors, and yet they never mentioned it in 19 months that there was already a first right of refusal in place. When John Doherty asked for contracts to look at what prior board actions had about what their priorities were as far as excess water, they gave him 95-66 that says short-term ag-based only in wet years. They had obviously completely ignored that and then moved ahead with the San Francisco water sale. We were suspect that Tim O'Loughlin and Alan Short had already signed the agreement and encumbered the district.
Familiar names there.
Yes, the general manager and general counsel had encumbered us. So we were suspicious, but we never got any tangible put your finger on it evidence until April 23rd what MID did after they couldn't get to for whatever reason they decided not to sell the water. They actually voted 5-0 to end negotiations. Well, I'm finding out now, because that was a very suspicious event. We never, at least I never was able to connect the dots as to why they did that. And I just learned that approximately 20 or more people in the county had actually gone to the grand jury and filed complaints against the MID board for intent to harm public health and safety. So somebody from grand jury may have given somebody over at MID a call and said, cease and desist, guys, or we're going to take this up. Don't know whether that's true, but something stopped them. So their circumvention of the overwhelming community support, and I want to explain community support. So on January the 11th of 2012, at the first session of moving the water sale forward, 42 people got up and spoke in opposition. One guy got up and spoke for opposition of 10 points and then went neutral on 1 or 2 points. And board chairman Tom Van Groningen said, in summarizing the whole day, "I'm glad we've had a lot of support for the sale today." That was his rewriting history, the little outtake that you can do.
Yeah, as you were sitting there,
Yes.
he was rewriting,
he had to get his outtake. So what we found was, and Emerson Drake has probably talked about this here, is MID is prohibited from promoting, going advocating or promoting a policy in the community or trying to sway the community. It's my best estimate, and I think it's easily documentable, that MID spent between $2 and $3 million of ratepayer money to promote the water sale to San Francisco. In the process of doing that, under consent items, the board would approve a payment to Martino and Associates, of which the money was flowing through to Mike Lynch and to George Petrolakis to go out and promote the sale. Well, what Emerson has identified is that the Lynch received some $70,000. Now that just happens to match up with the probable consulting cost for him running 3 of the directors' campaigns.
It almost sounds like MID had a super PAC going on.
Except it was ratepayer money.
Yeah.
It was your money and my money.
Yes. I felt the crunch.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that explains why, in part, that they're $1.7 billion in debt. But so first of all, they're advocating something that they're prohibited to legally. They didn't vote the money up and straight to go out and promote the deal. They laundered it through a graphics art firm to a political consultant, to a political attorney that went out, and we've had people tell us that they were paid to go to the microphone to promote the water sale. So after all that money is spent and they can't seal the deal, they decided that they would form a water advisory committee. Now, they had already had an ag committee and an urban committee, but who sat on the ag committee?
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to know the players and how much each person is getting paid, or their company for consulting.
Well,
maybe I should open up a consulting business.
There's lots of prerequisites.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get to it. I know you have a graph over here. I want to see the graph. What is that about?
Well,
let me take a look at that while you're explaining.
Yeah, I'm talking about this. So the water advisory, Alan Short tells new director Mike Serpa that he has an ag advisory committee of former directors that he relies upon. Well, who would that possibly be? None other than Bill Lyons. And also so Bill Lyons is the chair of the Stealth Ag Committee that's not public. Mr. Bob Ott's on the committee, and then a couple of staff. While on the urban committee, it's land use manipulator Dave Romano that's involved in basically every illicit, in my opinion, manipulation of land use type of stuff that's going on. So what we saw over the last 18 months is it wasn't really an ag advisory committee, it was a shadow board of directors. So Tom Van Groningen, in front of camera, informs us that he's going to form a new committee, and that only large landowners should be able to sit on it because they've got the most to lose. End quote. So they formed a water advisory committee last fall, and they appointed 7 folks. One of the 7 is City Modesto Public Works, and each director, 5 directors, got to appoint. And then I don't recall what the next entity was. It's made up of engineers, and I've been following it. But what I found was, and I was here last time we went through the numbers about the deal. Part of the problem with this whole scenario is that there is no water to sell. And yet Mr. Mortensen, who is running for the board and who is supported by Mr. Lyons and by a co-chairman of this water advisory committee, Mr. Van Konynenberg, Paul Van Konynenberg, who's also a large landowner, is that and Mortensen got up on April 23rd and said, we need to conserve water. And because if you're conserving, that infers that you're wasting. So in order to stop wasting, we have to conserve. So by conserving, you empirically prove that you were wasting, and you have to establish beneficial use. Well, if you're wasting, all that you conserve is now documented as having been wasted. So you may not have control over that water into the future. I mean, I'm not a water legal expert, but I'm listening to the conversations. But the long and the short of the thing is the MID board formed a water advisory committee with 7 men on it in order to not take the heat as they continued with the water sale. So the kinds of things that they've done is we find out from Mr. Mortensen that 2 directors, Bird and Blum, did not know is that San Francisco already had a first right of refusal. It was signed after 95-66. It was a motion by the board 96-12 that gives San Francisco first right of refusal for all out-of-basin transfers. So Mortensen drops that bomb on everybody in the room. The next week, Joan Retzchow goes to the microphone and said, Director Bird, were you aware of first right of refusal? No. Director Blum, were you aware of first right of refusal? No. Director Van Groningen, were you aware of first right of refusal? Yes. Director Wild, yes. Director Warda, yes. Acting General Manager Roger Van Hoy, were you aware of first right of refusal? Yes. So here the general manager knows about a secret deal and doesn't have the integrity or the fiduciary obligation to notify 2 other directors so that they can manage the district properly.
Why did they not mention that in the 19 months of when you and John DeWardy and others were advocating the sale to be, what do you call it, squashed?
Well, they've violated numerous Public Records Acts because we asked for those documents and they didn't produce them. So the fact that Mr. Van Hoy is acknowledged that he knew about this and yet failed, even after it came up, failed to disclose, it's troubling.
Do you feel that they're flaunting their ability to not be held to the same accountability as others who have to be forthcoming with public records requests?
Absolutely. I probably have 100 Public Records Act requests that have been ignored. And I've actually had staff laugh at me in the elevator, just chuckle that I didn't get what I asked for. So yes, they absolutely flaunt it. I've got 4 Public Records Act requests in right now to cause MID to produce 1 example of every single water obligation. That session takes place tomorrow. So
what's the date on that in case somebody's listening to
that'll
replay
be
on this?
June the 4th.
Okay. And is it at the
It'll
MID?
be at MID offices, and it is with Assistant General Manager Walter Ward. So he's had about 2 months to prepare for this, and hopefully he will have done his fiduciary responsibility to comply with Public Records Act to produce an example of all water obligations. But so we've got. So I'm sitting in the Water Advisory Committee a week ago Friday, fly on the wall, just public sitting in the room, and they're going through their business, and they've got 3 scenarios that they're considering with various levels of sales of water to San Francisco. They also, their solutions to improving infrastructure just happen to match up with the 115 million and of the line item list that they wanted to implement back during the water sale. So the excuse was, we have 115 million of obligations and we need to go out and sell water to pay for the improvements.
So am I understanding this correctly? They wanted to have X amount of money, let's say, in the pot, right here. Okay, so then they created this thing over here with the water sale that didn't go through, but it's still on the table. But they still want to have the money for this, so now they're telling the public, we have to have the money for this to pay for this, when all along they wanted it for this to begin with.
Yeah, when these are co-joined and virtually no difference.
Do you feel like you're kind of in showbiz and the magician's on stage?
Watch the birdie.
Yeah.
One of the things, and actually what's interesting is I think there's at least 3 civil engineers that actually sit on this advisory committee, and I've been joking with a couple of them privately that what they're actually doing. They're engaged. They're involved in the committee. They're doing the public's work. But what they're actually doing is designing a gallows for themselves, and they're just thrilled about the quality of the gallows. I mean, that's literally what it looks like. So one of the examples of the manipulations is they went on a tour, and they went to the main lateral number 8 that dumps into the Stanislaus, and at the particular time they arrived, there was about a foot of water running over the spillway, and somebody did the calculations on how much water was being wasted. They didn't bother to explain to them that that was not MID's water, it was Oakdale Irrigation District's water. So the folks that are looking at the waste are just horrified, and we've got to fix the infrastructure. So they've been working for 6 months on fixing the infrastructure without the explanation that there wasn't any waste in the first place.
Isn't there supposed to be a certain amount of water that goes out into the river? And at some point in time I heard that somebody was calculating that that was wasted water, but in fact, isn't there a certain amount that's supposed to be allocated to go back into the river for environmental purposes and such?
There's a whole category of environmental stewardship, and so where it becomes a problem for us as drinking water and ag users of the water is that by the time you take the federal licensing obligations of water that's required to be put down the river, the 3,600 acre feet for steelhead to comply with a consent letter to US EPA, the Bay Delta and the San Joaquin River restoration, when you add all that up, the only place that water can be diminished from is from agriculture. So what I found with this water advisory committees is Alan Short and Tim O'Loughlin and Dr. Charles Burt from IRTC, which is MID's prime contractor for actually implementing the engineering for infrastructure improvements, have all publicly stated, either audio or videotaped, that there's 60,000 acre feet of water that seeps out of the bottom of Modesto Reservoir. Well, I get into the water advisory committee, and in their 3 scenarios, there's only 30,000 of seepage. They plugged up 50% of the seepage by doing nothing. Simply amazing what these engineers can do. Of course, it's an obfuscation and it's a manipulation, because if they've got 30,000 acre feet more than what they really do, that just gives them that much more to say that, well, we can afford to sell it to San Francisco.
So what's the big deal about selling water to San Francisco? Why the push? Why the secrecy? And I have to tell you that talking about water sales and the water players is very interesting, and it's actually, dare I say, more deadly than just local politics. I mean, dealing with the water, it's pretty scary, some of these players and the lengths that they'll go to make sure that their agenda is met. So why the big push to sell to San Francisco?
It's about control. And originally, one would think this is just a normal water war. It's not. It's about control. And I had a list to connect the dots.
Yes, I want to connect some of these dots.
So let me talk about the State Water Board came out with unimpaired flow, and the concept of unimpaired flow is that water comes into Don Pedro Dam and X% has to flow out the bottom for Chinook steelhead salmon. The problem with that is the time frame that they want to do that is from February through June, which is the time that the snow melt's running off, that you're actually filling up the lake. Well, with unimpaired flow, the ranges that they were talking about as we went into hearings back in April was 35% unimpaired flow. So that means if you have 100 gallons come into the top of the lake, 35 gallons has got to flow out for salmon. Well, that 35 gallons is not water that you're going to store midsummer to put out to the river to keep flows up. So effectively, you can't build up winter reserves, and you're just constantly spilling out. Well, 3 weeks ago, I was at a hearing here in Modesto out at the Ag Center, and the assistant director of water rights said, "I don't want anybody to be confused here. I know that you've been talking about and arguing about."
Was he pointing at you?
Well, I had my video camera on him, so he couldn't really see me, but he was talking to the crowd. I don't want anybody to be confused, because we're really not talking about 35% unimpaired flow. We're talking 45 to 55%. The max they asked that they'd propose was 60%. It doesn't matter what the percentage is. Right in the document, it states that it is their intention to dry up and fallow 220,000 acres of Modesto Irrigation District, Turlock Irrigation District, and Merced Irrigation
But
Districts.
why?
We'll get to that.
I want a dot. Give me a dot.
So we're going to connect the dots. So so they've stated that the result of their action would dry up these acres. Now, they say that it's to protect steelhead and Chinook salmon. Yet, MIDTID and Merced got together, hired fisheries biologists, and they tracked hatchlings out of these rivers. But keep in mind, they want the water to promote the salmon. But right in the document, they say, we don't know whether this scheme will work, but we're still going to do it. But
Does it actually say scheme?
pretty much, this scenario, this plan,
Okay.
this prospectus,
Check.
the regime scheme. I think scheme's an appropriate deal, because what MIDTID and Merced found was that somewhere between, on the low side, 92% of the salmon fry and 98% of the salmon fry were consumed by an introduced sport fishery called striped bass
Right.
before it hits the San Joaquin River.
And then they got to make it back.
Well, only 2% even make it to the river, to the San Joaquin River. So your upside potential of making it to the ocean and back again, your starting place is 2%. That doesn't include the stripers in San Pablo Bay or in the bay itself.
Well, how does drying up the water save the salmon?
It doesn't.
Is that where the red-legged frog comes in?
Well, that's where we leap to red-legged frog. But back to your question about what do they gain by taking all of the water away from agriculture in these
Right.
three counties? It's control. And what's interesting is they have preserved agriculture, land, but nobody will be farming it, especially the current landowners.
Okay, do you think that, and this is just a scenario, that someone is behind this water sale, and I'm not talking about local players,
Understand.
I'm talking about bigger players than us
Yes.
here. Someone is behind the water sale to sell the water that is now being quote-unquote wasted to the entity of San Francisco or whomever, because they may then in turn sell it to Santa Clara, wherever, to then cause a drought in this area, which would cause agriculture to literally dry up. And since agriculture then would be gone, then developers could come in and develop as an industrial area or housing or, do you think that something like that is behind this water sale at the very bottom of it?
There is, and it's all about ending agriculture in California. I mean, literally killing it. This legislature in Sacramento is the most adverse to production agriculture that has ever existed in the history of the state.
This is the richest land. I mean, I have traveled all over the United States, and in the Midwest, they grow wonderful crops. And I have seen, like Imperial Valley in Southern California, where there used to be orange groves down there in Ventura and all those places, they're gone.
Right.
And here in the Central Valley, it's some of the richest farmland in the nation, and we're paving over the top of it.
Well, the value of the contribution to society is irrelevant. The dollar and monetary value as it relates to these counties, just the little water sale to San Francisco was going to cost Modesto $1 billion a year starting this year, that they were currently receiving last year but would not receive this year. We're pushing 25% real unemployment. You take $1 billion out of the total Stanislaus County economy, and we're looking at 45% unemployment. That's exactly what I believe that they want as an outcome. Because if they didn't want that as an outcome, they would have put open season on striped bass, and they would have delisted the unindigenous species of Delta smelt. They have done none of that. But let me talk about red-legged or yellow-legged frog.
Oh, I thought it was red-legged.
Well,
Yellow.
it's the yellow
Okay. Here, let me read your notes here. Okay. So by Mountain Democrat, is this a?
Yeah, just read
Okay.
the bold part would
The
be
bold
good.
part, under threat of a lawsuit, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reached an agreement with the Center for Biological Diversity April 24 to propose the Sierra Yellow-Legged and Yosemite Toad for Endangered Species Act listing. Also proposed is protecting more than 2 million acres of habitat in the Sierra Nevada.
Okay, so we'll take it a step further. It's not really 2 million acres because that's a straight down line. That's just a boundary line. When you actually take the Sierras and tip them up on edge, it could be 3 million acres.
Okay, so it's aerial acres?
That's just a straight
Okay.
down
Right.
view is 2 million acres, but that doesn't include buffer zones. So it could be actually 4 to 5 million acres. This is just the first of, I believe, and I'm not positive about the number. I think it's 4. This is the first proposed listing, and they've got 422 candidates.
Wait a second here. Okay, I'm reading a little bit further here because this is the first time that I've seen this. I suggest that you print this off and read it also. So why is it that the yellow-legged frog gets 2 million acres and our salmon are being eaten at 98% rate before they even get to the ocean? Or
Well,
before they even get to that river?
It's about control. In a best case scenario, there's only 58 acres that have yellow-legged frogs on them. But what this is about is as with the striped bass eating the salmon, the real problem in the diminishment of yellow-legged frogs is because of the California Fish and Wildlife that went and planted non-native trout in high-altitude lakes.
The trout are eating the frogs?
The trout ate the frogs.
Now, I'm a frog advocate, okay, from way back. So I'm all for saving the frogs. But 2 million acres seems like an awful lot. When somebody brought in the trout that eat the frogs, why not get rid of the trout?
Well, the Fish and Wildlife has gone in and probably they used rotenone, which is an insecticide, to...
Don't get me started on that. Oh my goodness. That's a whole other show for another time.
Yeah, they've used rotenone probably in these high lakes to kill off the trout, but the broader problem is that there is a fungus that has come in, and the broader problem is that the fungus, typically you'd think if you had a problem in a mountain stream or mountain lake that the problem's going to move downhill, gravity. But the actual issue is that the frog is a fungus that is being piggybacked on the Pacific chorus frog. So if you ever go out at night and you hear the chirping around ponds and creeks and stuff, the Pacific chorus frog is immune to this fungus. Well, the Pacific chorus frog is going upstream. So it's the typhoid Mary of...
The chorus frog's a typhoid Mary,
for-
carrying it upstream
yes.
to the yellow-legged frog.
Yes. So there is no cure for this in a biological system that's been discussed
Well,
as far as I know.
Then it doesn't matter if they have $2 million, I'm thinking dollars here, 2 million acres or 2 acres. If they can't get rid of it, eventually, they may need 4 million or 5 million acres, and it still is going to kill the yellow-legged frog.
Well, just as...
Why not take care of the cause instead of the effect?
Well, to restate what...
I'm not picking on you in particular.
No. To restate what's going on with unimpaired flow, let's say just on the Tuolumne River, what we're being told is that we have to fallow, dry up, and bankrupt 58,000 acres of prime permanent crop farmland so that the water board can feed salmon to striped bass. So if we come back to the yellow-legged frog,
Okay.
if the only conclusion one that can come to is that they're going to cost Stanislaus County $200 billion to feed salmon to striped bass, if that's what they're really saying they're going to do, then you step back and say that's stupid, but not in the context of what they're up to. The goal is to kill agriculture in these 3 counties. So if you ask about the yellow-legged frog, I was in Auburn on Saturday at a conference that was mostly mining organizations and actual miners, the bulk of which are gold miners. And the question that was raised is why does the footprint of this endangered species habitat just happen to match up with all of the proven reserves of gold in the Sierras? This is a taking, and this is about control. What they want to do is see if you can't perfect and maintain your claim because you can't get to it because you've been banned,
Right.
you lose your claim.
So who is the one trying to control this? You've mentioned control about 5 times now. So who is the controller or the controlling organization behind drying up the land and protecting the chorus frog and the yellow-legged frog and the striped bass?
There are lots of names for it. I think the simplest term that your audience and that we can generically refer to as global governance is that a global entity is after our resources. They're trying to displace us from the land. They're going to kick humans out of between 2 and 5 million acres of high Sierras.
Yeah.
So no hiking, no fishing, no boating, no mining, no forestry. So let's talk about the forestry side for a second. A month ago I was in Nevada City for a Board of Supervisors presentation by a gentleman by the name of Doyle Shamley, who's out of Apache County, Arizona. He is a constitutional scholar and consultant, and what he had identified, they'd had an enormous fire down there. And Doyle identified he rationally and reasonably tried to work with Forest Service to get him to cut the timber that had been burned up, and in response, the Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, came in and locked all the roads. So the Board of Supervisors down there directed the sheriff to go and open all of the gates, and this was related firsthand to us again on Saturday, but the sheriff went in and cut the Forest Service locks off the gates, locked them in the open position, and put a brass tag on the new lock that said, remove this lock and I will arrest you and imprison you, and that includes if you're a federal government employee. So the roads have maintained open. They're about 3 years, and they've got 6 new sawmills, and I think 600 different people that are now working in that area. The counter to that is in Tombstone, Arizona. A different fire, same scenario, burned everything to the ground, but it glazed over the soil, and actually it's like volcanic glass, so water will not penetrate it. What you physically have to go in with is caterpillars and other kinds of steel-toed vehicles, grind up the glass, break it up so that when rainfall comes down, and their rainfall principally is late summer, thunder, tropical kinds of weather, so that the water will actually go into the ground. Instead, they've got flash floods, mud, and Tombstone has no drinking water. So you've got two scenarios. The causal agent's the same. The political and administrative response from elected officials is entirely different. One is protected in the public health and safety of Apache County. Tombstone has destroyed their economy and their citizenry. So if we come back to so I go to Nevada City, and we were there for 2.5 hours. Mr. Shanley goes through a methodical presentation of what he had done in Apache County, talked about how to, so in Nevada County, there are 400 to 700 trees per acre when a sustainable forest is 40 up there. So they need 40, they've got 400 to 700. There's 45 dry tons of firewood per acre. So if you can picture a truck and trailer rig, each trailer, I'm trying to think. I think you can put about 45 tons on a truck and trailer rig and include the trailer and still make keep under gross weight. So if you picture a loosely stacked pile of matchsticks, various sizes and stuff, stacked up on the bed of a truck to the point where it's 100 feet high, but only weighs 45 dry tons, picture lighting that on fire. Mm-hmm. Basically, where we're at right now for Nevada County and most of the Sierras is we're going to have devastating, I'm trying to remember the clinical term that they used, killing fires. I mean, it kills trees. Mm-hmm. Right now, the whole of Nevada County, with basically in a single day of dry lightning, would burn the county to the ground. We sat there and watched this go on, and yet 3 of the 5 supervisors challenged Mr. Shanley's integrity. They called him a liar. They challenged his resume. They said that he was concocting the whole thing, and Shanley actually went through and laid out where there was grant money for the county board of supervisors to get to clear the forests and have all the math work out and not burden the taxpayer. And yet they basically ran him out of the room and did nothing. So as it relates back to the yellow-legged frog, the listing will ban any forest management, any logging, and any intervention on up to 5 million acres of the Sierras. These people are intending to burn the place to the ground so that there is no lumber, no timber in the future ever.
And we don't have any water to send them, so.
Well, and actually, the water deal. See.
I'm just checking the time here. We have about 20 minutes left, so I want you to make sure you get to the other dots.
Right, I can do that. One of the troubling things. There's a professor at UC Merced who's rated as one of the top forestry and ecological experts in the world. He's recently gone in and through new instrumentation has been able to go through and do new data on evapotranspiration out of pines and firs into the air. In other words, the roots are picking up water and snow melt out of the ground and evaporating that into the air. Well, with his new instrumentation, he's identified that with the existing forest, we're losing 1 million acre feet of water. That's enough to fill up Don Pedro Dam. Just in the Central Sierras, we're losing 1 million acre feet of water a year because we're not managing the forest.
I have an idea. Why doesn't San Francisco buy that water? They can go up there and kind of squeeze it out of the trees.
Well, they're the same folks that want to tear down Hetch Hetchy, which actually makes me wonder whether Hetch Hetchy would become a mandatory component of yellow-legged frog. Because you can't be there to run it.
Right.
You can't get on the road to get there. All that kind of stuff. So
now, for the people who live out of the area, kind of give them a map of where Nevada County is versus where we are here in the Central Valley and where you're talking about in the Sierras and so forth.
Sure. So the range is, as I recall the maps, the maps are on the website. If you go and look on defendruralamerica.com, you can find the maps and the whole narrative and the strategy to push back against U.S. EPA on endangered species listing of the yellow-legged frog. But it runs from Grass Valley, which is the county seat for Nevada County. So we're sitting in Merced. To get to Nevada City, it's 99 to Sacramento, Interstate 80 to Auburn, and then Highway 49 about an hour north to Grass Valley.
Okay.
So basically, if you take Yosemite and go all the way to Grass Valley is the area that they're basically going to ban human activity.
I have a half a dozen friends up there. I'm going to call them after the show and ask them if they've heard any rumblings about any of this, and if so, what it is. So,
well, what's troubling is...
just hang on. Sargon, can we have some air in here? Are you burning up too? Speaking of all this water and forest fires.
I could use some rainfall.
Some water? Thank you.
Yes, please.
We need some water over here.
The troubling thing is that when you get a killing fire, and if the government and Forest Service were being responsible, they'd replant. They don't. Only private landholders are replanting when areas are logged, as I understand. So the problem now is if you ban human activity and you get a killing fire with this a tremendous amount of combustibles up there, what replaces it is buckbrush and manzanita, and your water runoff drops precipitously. And I've actually spoken to hydrologists and ecologists that said that if we just controlled the manzanitas, buckbrushes below 2,500 feet, in other words, if we took care of all the brush on the eastern side and in the coastal range, if we took the brush out, except for in the bottoms of the swales and creeks, we took it off the north slopes of each of these knolls, it would double the amount of available water in the state of California. Wow. So that's low level increasing water the professor at UC Merced is saying that we've increased runoff from these 3 districts by 1 million acre feet.
I don't think that we have ever discussed what it is that you do specifically. So if we can just take a couple minutes, what is your stake in all this, and what has got your interest piqued about it? What is your profession that brings you to the table for this?
I'm actually an environmentalist. In a true sense of the word. For 40 years, I have been doing agricultural research and product development in the arena of pesticides and fertilizers. In fact, I had a very lengthy conversation about folks were alleging that this yellow-legged frog is being diminished by glyphosate herbicide. And so I went to the link, and the researcher said, yes, we sprayed glyphosate on the toad and it died. Well, that's 55% solution that they sprayed directly on the organism. I would like that researcher to make his body available for me to spray something on it of my choosing, as opposed to, because no, I mean, I'm proposing a scientific piece of research
and
here.
you know that insecticide and pesticide and so on, it's when it's in the concentrated form, not the kind that necessarily that the farmer dilutes and sprays
Right.
everywhere. It is deadly, absolutely deadly. I did some research on some of the stuff that's being sprayed in the area where I live, and there are skull and crossbones on the website itself.
Yeah, and
so
is required on the label.
55% solution on a little frog, and it killed it.
Well,
How big are the frogs anyway?
I actually don't know. I've not seen one.
I'll see if I can
They're-
bring up a picture of one. We'll bring it next week.
Well, they're not
The
going to.
picture.
They're not going to tell us where they are.
Well, they got 2 million acres.
I'm kidding.
We should be able to find them
Yeah,
this
but to
week.
answer your question, I've had my own corporation for 30 years, and the principal arenas of the activities has been actually doing registration and regulatory packages
Oh, good.
for clients.
That's good.
And then a third of the
I'll scoot back in now.
a third of the business is actually generating the data to support those packages. So in the data arena, virtually all of that data generation is overseen and controlled by US EPA through guidelines that have been posted and run through. So there's guidelines for each discipline that you have to do. If you need to do residue on food, there's a guideline for it. If you need to do a processed food feed study, you need to do drift, surface water, groundwater. There's guidelines. When you attempt to go out and run these studies, there has to be, the guideline requires that you have protocols. The protocol structure is all required within the guideline. The net effect is that everything is done under what's called EPA's Good Laboratory Practices guidelines. And should you fail to follow or should you manipulate data, I literally know of people that are in Leavenworth prison for dry labbing data. So it's not something that you mess with.
Dry labbing? What is that, faking?
Fabricating.
Okay, cheating.
Yeah, you didn't
Okay.
go into the wet lab, you sat at your computer and made up the numbers.
Oh,
So I'm only aware of one case where that's occurred, but they actually sent the whole the management of the company, all of them to Leavenworth for like 20, 25 years. This was not a lightweight
Wow.
deal. So the point is the public health and safety data is within the industry is treated very seriously. It's actually deeply concerning to engage into these protocols and such. You really have to be up to the task because it's very, I mean, it's life and death. It's certainly life and death and your freedom if you mess up. So that was a third, and then another third of the business was screening chemistry for bioactivity to decide whether to put it into the data generation and the regulatory arena. But within the data generation, I'm co-author on 2 ecological risk assessments. One is organophosphate pest insecticides in the San Joaquin and Sacramento River. And then more specifically, one of the last large studies that I did was actually looking at the insecticide Lorsban that's still registered for use on walnuts and alfalfa, but it was done over on the west side in the Orostemba Creek drainage. And they actually took the whole drainage, and my part in the study was to actually quantify all the irrigation water and all the rainfall, everything that went into the ground. And then they had auto sampling devices in the runoff streams where they would sample every 15 minutes. And they pull the samples out, so they knew how much Lorsban was actually egressing from the field. So they were the purpose was try to correlate water input in totality, but also in proximity to application. In other words, how long did it take for it to tie up and not move off?
Right.
So
are you a chemist?
No, I have a general science degree from Oregon State, and so I would manage large groups. Some of the projects have had 3 or 4 laboratories. I'm dealing with PhD chemists. I'm dealing with hydrologists, geologists. I've had projects that had as many as 11 attorneys involved. I'm dealing with fisheries biologists, aquatic and marine specialists. It's been professionally, it's been a blast. But my contribution is I was the generalist. So I would stand back, look at, all right, you want to move your project from point A to point B. What are the resources? What's the timeline? So I was project manager over very complicated projects. I'm guessing that my business probably did 80% of all the processed food and feeds residue studies in the United States between 1985 and 1992. And that was because the National Food Lab in Livermore was effectively out of business at that time. So it was a good business opportunity to step in and generate a lot of data for a fee. As it relates back to why am I interested in the water deal, is I just absolutely hate being lied to by bureaucrats. And from the very moment of walking into my very first MID board meeting, I heard lies. And not just 1 or 2, dozens. And within a week, I documented, I mean, we had the MID general manager and general counsel getting up and bragging in public that they had bribed Senator Dianne Feinstein with a quid pro quo. If we'll give her 30,000 acre feet of water and she'll interfere personally in the FERC realizing for Don Pedro to our behalf. We need friends. In fact, Alan Short actually referred to Dianne Feinstein as our 800-pound gorilla. Now, I didn't know where he got that term until Feinstein came to town for lunch at the Doubletree in August or September, and she talked about 800-pound gorillas. So then I knew that Alan Short had gotten the term directly from the senator, because she probably offered to be his 800-pound gorilla. Back to the...
More dots.
More dots. The other component of what's going on is the state has passed SB 375, and under the guise of global warming and CO2, man-made CO2, they have dictated that we need to move into a stack and pack arrangement. No more living in your ranchette or in your neighborhood. And actually right now in the Bay Area, the proposal for the stack and pack deal there is that they intend to tear down 160,000 single-family residences in the Bay Area.
What happened to freedom to own property? Whatever property, say I have $1 million, I can go out and buy 2 million acres with a frog on it if I want to. You know, well, not really, but you know what I mean? Why are we being forced into the stack and pack? I don't want to get rid of my ranchette.
Well, are you going to be able to afford to live there when you have no surface water?
Okay, so somebody's squeezing me out.
They squeeze you out. Then
I feel like a turnip.
Okay, then somewhere buried in that other 422 listings that are coming, there happens to be a gnat that winters on your property.
There's more than the frog?
There's 422. This is the first one. They're going to get 5 million, over 2 million by their own upfront statement. They're going to take 2 million on the very first listing that they're going through.
Okay, are the other ones listed here?
No, they're
where can we find the listing of all of those?
The DefendRuralAmerica.com website will give you links to get to where the other listings are. The broader scheme of the thing is the stack and pack. What they're doing is SB 375 and it's per county, but in Stanislaus County, they're mandating that the county build 25,640 low-income, high-density units.
High density meaning high rise?
High rises,
Okay.
stack and pack, rabbit hutches. If you assume, I'll just pick a round number, if you assume that there's 4 human beings in each one of those 25,000, that means that the SB 375 and the state legislature, in their effort to reduce carbon emissions in Stanislaus County, they're going to increase the population by 100,000.
Okay, so I understand that we need to take care of the widows and the orphans. I understand that. And I'm an advocate for helping the low income to the struggling of society have a decent place to live. However, if there is 25,000 homes,
New units.
new units, I don't think that we have 100,000 people in Stanislaus County that are low income. Are they going to ship them in from someplace?
Well, they are going to ship them in, but more troubling is, and Supervisor Dick Monteith has affirmed this through his communications with staff, is that the county has absolutely no control over where these people come from. They can come from Chicago or Oakland. Willie Brown proclaimed years ago his intention to export his poor and his criminals, and that he was going to send them over the hill, actually directly targeted at Stockton and Modesto. He was bragging about that.
Why? I mean, is it because we have the farmland that is now going to be dried up because we have no water, so you might as well build stack and packs and put everybody into, I don't want to say internment camps, but it almost sounds like a concentrated high-rise stack and pack, and just ship everybody there instead of allowing them to live wherever they want to live.
Well,
Am I understanding this correctly?
You are, and that's exactly where this is headed. So they're going to the part of the reason they need to control all the gold that could be mined in the state is gold is a circumvention of the Federal Reserve's fiat currency. I had it related to me that there's a 3-star general that's been on the talk shows saying that he was in charge of chemical weapons, and that his primary storehouse was Fort Knox, and that in his inventory he had to know what the size of the container was, or the box or the drum, and how much space it occupied. So he had gone public after a few years of retirement to let the public know that the chemical weapons stored at Fort Knox occupy 97.5% of the total volume of the total facility. There's no room for any gold. So what's occurred is that if there's no gold at Fort Knox, it's gone somewhere else. We're told that it's in the Federal Reserve Bank in Manhattan, underground. But the issue about controlling through yellow-legged frog is if you and I can't go out and prospect, as is guaranteed by both the Constitution and Acts of Congress in the 1860s, right after the Civil War, because they didn't have metal resources. So they made our ability to go and prospect a priority among all activities. On public lands, we have a right to go and prospect and mine. So what they're doing is they're stopping us from being able to acquire any useful commodity, food, gold, silver, to survive upon, and while they control a paper currency that they're printing us into oblivion. But the stack and pack, in conjunction with this whole thing, really raises the question about where are we headed societally. So as it relates back, we've got 3 MID directors seats coming up in Stanislaus County inside the MID district this November, and it's my opinion that these 3 elections will be the most important to the future of this community forever.
Thank you very much for joining me this evening and being a special guest for the entire hour. I know sometimes it's difficult to talk for 60 minutes, but you've made it very interesting, and I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You've talked a couple times about Defend Rural America. We can find that on the internet at defendruralamerica.com. But we would also like to be able to get in touch with Reed Smith. So where can we find you, other than at the MID meetings?
My business email is reedsmith@charter.net. I'm willing to accept correspondence through that email. And if I might add in closing, Athens, that the federal government is intent on doing all this. The state government has demonstrated through unimpaired flow that they're intending to do this. The only defense that we have is at the county level, and the most important officials in our lives from this point forward is the Board of Supervisors and the county sheriff. And we need to make sure that they are all constitutional in their worldview. That is not the case of what I see with this Board of Supervisors, and particularly with this Modesto City Council.
I hope you come back between now and summertime, because that's when the campaigns are really going to start gearing up, to kind of give us your opinion about, you know, who is out there and what they stand for, so the viewers can kind of get a grasp on it, because you meet them, sometimes I meet them, and it's not always possible for the general public to do a meet and greet. So
well, if you're not in their venue, if you're not seeing a lot of what they're doing, you didn't hear
right
the whole story.
Right.
As we've seen with Mr. Mortensen, his position is conserving water, inferring we waste it, and monetizing it and selling it to San Francisco. He's on public record, and he's running for the MID board, and that is a totally unacceptable position.
Thank you for joining me. I'm
My
getting
pleasure.
the high sign in the director's room, so we got to say goodnight. I'm Athens Abell, and as always, I'm on watch for you.